Emily's voice trembled as she said, "Why would you do this to me, Sophie?" The room pulsed with silence, broken only by Sophie's sharp laugh that felt more like a knife than joy. Daniel stood frozen, his eyes darting between us, guilt etched across his face like a shadow he couldn't hide. I felt my heart crack louder than any word Sophie could throw at me, the betrayal smoldering in her gaze, as if she had been waiting for this moment. Mark shifted in the corner, his expression heavy, the weight of his silence pressing down on me like a judgment I never asked for. Sophie said, "Because you never saw it coming, Emily, and that's what makes it perfect." I wanted to scream, to tear down the years of promises we once made under the stars, but my throat locked, suffocated by grief. Daniel whispered, "I never meant for it to be like this," but even his softness stabbed deeper than Sophie's cruelty. Memories flooded in, laughter, shared secrets, promises it sitched in the air like fragile glass now shattered across the floor. The air was thick, suffocating, filled with the sound of trust breaking, and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The echoes of Sophie's laughter clung to my chest long after it stopped. Emily whispered inside her head, wondering how every promise they made as teenagers could dissolve into something so ugly. Sophie leaned back, arms crossed like she had won something priceless. Daniel stepped forward, his hands half raised, but he looked like a man caught between drowning in guilt and begging for air. Emily said, "All those nights we swore we'd never let the world come between us, did that mean nothing to you?" Sophie's eyes hardened, voice sharp. "The world didn't come between us, Emily. I did." The words cracked like thunder, and for a moment the room felt smaller, tighter, suffocating. Mark's silence screamed louder than any accusation, and the storm outside seemed to echo Emily's breaking heart. Emily felt her memories claw at her like ghosts refusing to fade. She thought of shared summers, of Sophie's hand pulling her through crowded streets, of secrets spoken under moonlight. Daniel stepped closer, voice low, "I didn't want to hurt you." Emily snapped, "Then why am I bleeding from every word you never said?" Sophie smirked, lips curling like a blade, "Because you were too blind to see me standing in the shadows." Mark shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering between them. Emily's chest heaved, breath ragged as if every inhale was a betrayal she had to swallow. The storm rattled the windows, like even the night outside knew the friendship was collapsing in flames. Emily wanted to run, but her feet were cemented to the floor. She thought of laughter-filled phone calls, of Sophie's voice promising, "No matter what." Now Sophie's grin tore through every promise like claws through silk. Emily cried, "We were supposed to be forever." Sophie's reply came like ice, "Forever is a story you told yourself." Daniel looked like he might collapse under the weight of silence. Mark lowered his eyes, as if carrying truths he wished he could bury. Emily's tears dropped, each one carrying the echo of years lost, of love wasted on someone who smiled while shattering her. Emily's body trembled, her voice barely audible as she whispered, "I don't even recognize you anymore." Sophie tilted her head, eyes glinting with victory. "That's because you only ever saw the version I let you see." Daniel ran a hand through his hair, shoulders sagging as though crushed by the gravity of betrayal. Mark finally spoke, his voice low but cutting. Some truths rot everything they touch. The words lingered like smoke, curling through the silence and choking Emily's already fractured heart. She realized then that the friendship was gone, not stolen but poisoned, and there was no cure. The storm outside grew louder, or maybe it was just the sound of her world caving in. Emily remembered summer nights, where laughter echoed louder than the cicadas. Sophie had linked their pinkies under the stars and whispered, "Forever, no matter what." Emily clung to that memory now, even as Sophie's betrayal poisoned her heart. They were 16, sprawled on a rooftop, trading secrets like treasures. Sophie confessed dreams of escaping their small town. Emily swore she would follow her anywhere. Daniel had been nothing more than a distant name then, and Mark was the one climbing up ladders with snacks, laughing at their childish vows. Emily thought, if forever once existed, how could it decay into venom so fast? Sophie's voice echoed from the past, warm and sincere. No world can break us, Em. Those words now felt like glass shards under Emily's skin. She ached for the girl Sophie once was, not the stranger smirking in her living room. Memory felt like betrayal's cruelest weapon, reminding Emily of what was lost before it was stolen. Emily could still taste the sweetness of soda they shared, the fizz stinging her tongue as Sophie dared her to drink it upside down. Their laughter spilled into the quiet night, daring the world to silence them. Sophie had said, "We'll be legends one day, Em, the kind people write about." Emily had believed it, believed in her so blindly it hurt now. Mark teased them, "You two are disasters waiting to happen." His grin never cruel, only affectionate. Emily held on to those sounds like lifelines, sounds that mocked her now as betrayal filled the silence. She thought of how Sophie's eyes had once sparkled with genuine joy, not venom. "We'll never drift apart," Sophie had said. Emily whispered into the storm of memory. "You lied, Sophie, even then." The rooftop had been their cathedral, their temple of promises, and now those stars felt like witnesses to a crime of the heart. Emily thought of rainstorms when Sophie showed up soaked, shivering, but smiling as though they owned the world. They'd wrap themselves in one blanket, whispering confessions between chattering teeth. Sophie had admitted, "I hate how small I feel sometimes," and Emily answered, "Not with me." Mark brought cocoa, his quiet gestures binding them together in ways words never could. Sophie had rested her head on Emily's shoulder, voice muffled but warm. "You're the only one I trust with my ugly." Now, standing in the ruins of their friendship, Emily wondered when those words had soured, when trust turned into ammunition. Daniel's face flickered into memory too, though he was only a figure at the edges of their lives then. She wondered if betrayal had started in those silences long ago, hidden even inside moments of intimacy. Emily recalled the summer carnival, lights painting Sophie's hair in neon colors, their laughter echoing under Ferris wheel hums. Sophie had dared Emily to ride until sunrise, her grin brighter than the bulbs strung across the fair. Emily had clutched Sophie's hand, screaming into the wind, but she never let go. Mark had taken pictures, his smile quiet, but genuine, capturing memories none of them realized would one day cut like knives. Sophie had shouted, "We're unstoppable," and Emily believed it, heart racing with joy. That same hand Sophie once held now felt poisonous. The Ferris wheel slowed in her memory, lights flickering like fading promises. The carnival was alive with music then, but in Emily's chest, it played now like a funeral march for a friendship that could not survive its own shadows. Emily's chest tightened at the memory of Sophie, singing badly to a mixtape, voice cracking but fearless. They had danced barefoot in her kitchen, spoons as microphones, laughter thick enough to drown sorrow. Sophie shouted, "If we ever fight, and promise we'll fix it with music." Emily had spun in circles, dizzy from joy, shouting, "Always." Mark leaned in doorway, shaking his head with mock disapproval, though his smile betrayed affection. The kitchen glowed with warmth then, the smell of toast burning as they ignored everything but each other's presence. Emily whispered now, her heart breaking, "We had everything, Sophie, and you ruined it." She could almost hear Sophie's old laughter haunting the silence. That laughter had been her anchor, and now it was her ghost. Emily stared at her phone, thumb hovering over Sophie's name, heartbeat racing with dread. Calls unanswered, messages left to rot in silence, each excuse sharp enough to leave scars. Sophie finally texted, "Busy, don't wait." Emily whispered, "You never used to be too busy for me." Daniel noticed the change too, his voice soft but uneasy. "She's pulling away. Emma." Emily snapped, "Don't you think I know that?" The tension in her chest grew heavier, pressing like a weight she couldn't shake. Mark stood beside her, eyes lingering on the unanswered screen, silent but knowing. Emily remembered when Sophie once called at 3 a.m., just to laugh about nothing. Now she couldn't spare 30 seconds. The space between them grew, not sudden but creeping, and Emily felt herself screaming into a void where Sophie's laughter used to echo. Every unanswered call was a crack in the foundation of forever. Emily overheard whispers at the cafe, Sophie leaning too close to strangers, her laugh too sharp, too secret. Sophie said, "Don't tell Emily, she won't get it." The words pierced like needles, though they weren't meant for her. Emily froze in place, coffee cooling in her hands, her throat dry with the sting of betrayal forming shadows. Daniel caught her expression, asked, "What did she say?" But Emily only shook her head, unwilling to bleed the truth aloud. Sophie glanced over with a smile that looked innocent to everyone but Emily. The lie was in her eyes, in the way they avoided Emily's gaze. Mark stirred his drink, silent, as if he already knew. The cafe felt too loud, every laugh cutting like glass. Emily sat there drowning, hearing Sophie's voice in waves she could no longer trust. Emily couldn't ignore it anymore. The long looks, the delayed answers, Sophie's smile that didn't reach her eyes. At the party, Sophie shined, surrounded by people who adored her. Emily tried to stand beside her, but Sophie's hand slipped away every time. Sophie said, "You're being clingy, Em." The words dripped like poison into her chest. Daniel noticed, his brow furrowing as he watched Sophie glide across the room. Emily wanted to scream, to pull Sophie back into the orbit they once shared, but she stood frozen in the shadow of Sophie's brilliance. Mark muttered, "Stars burn out when they shine too hard," his words low but piercing. Emily's smile cracked, her heart caving as Sophie laughed with someone else, as if their promises had never existed. The party was alive with light, but Emily felt swallowed by darkness. Emily replayed Sophie's words over and over, clingy, as if loyalty was a crime. She tried to call later that night, voice breaking with every unanswered ring. Sophie texted, "Stop being dramatic." Emily whispered, "This is what forever looks like." Daniel sat beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, his silence louder than comfort. Mark sat in the corner, eyes heavy with quiet warning. Emily thought of every midnight secret, every laughter-soaked memory, now shattered like glass beneath her feet. She clung to denial like a lifeline, praying Sophie was just tired, stressed, not cruel. But the truth burned too bright. Forever was unraveling, thread by fragile thread, and Emily was powerless to stop it. The distance became undeniable. Sophie skipped plans, her excuses too polished, her smile too sharp. Emily asked, "Did I do something wrong?" Sophie laughed coldly, "Not everything is about you." Daniel's fists clenched, jaw tight as though he wanted to speak but held back. Emily's chest hollowed, her pulse echoing like thunder. Mark finally said, "You see it, Emily, you just don't want to admit it." The silence after his words cut deeper than Sophie's cruelty. Emily wanted to beg, to plead, but pride chained her voice. Every promise Sophie once made flickered like dying embers. Emily knew the storm was coming, but she could not stop staring at the horizon, waiting for Sophie to turn back, waiting for a forever that was already gone. Emily sensed something sharp beneath Sophie's surface, but she never imagined it would cut this deep. One evening, she caught Sophie lingering too close to Daniel, her hand brushing his arm like it belonged there. Daniel shifted uneasy, but he didn't move away fast enough. Sophie said with a sly smile, "Funny how easily secrets slip when people get comfortable." Emily's breath faltered, suspicion blooming into terror. Mark whispered later, "You should ask her what she wants from him." The weight of that thought pressed heavy on Emily's chest. She remembered every promise Sophie made, every vow of loyalty, and wondered if those words were bait all along. Sophie laughed that night, eyes meeting Emily's, daring her to notice. And Emily did. For the first time, she realized the betrayal wasn't creeping in the shadows anymore, it was standing in plain sight. Emily finally confronted Sophie, voice trembling, "What are you doing with him?" Sophie leaned closer, lips curved like a knife. "Maybe he was never yours to begin with." Daniel froze, eyes wide, guilt spilling across his face before he could speak. Emily felt the floor tilt beneath her feet, her trust crashing into pieces she couldn't gather. Mark muttered, "Truth always finds the loudest room." Sophie laughed softly, her words venom-laced. "You built your world on fairy tales, Emily. I just lived in reality." Emily's heart broke not from Daniel's silence, but from Sophie's satisfaction. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. A knife she'd sharpened over years of hidden envy. Emily's world spun as she realized Sophie had been waiting for this, waiting for her to break. Emily's breath shattered as Sophie delivered the truth she never saw coming. Sophie said, "He told me things he never told you." Daniel flinched, eyes locking on Emily with a silent apology. Emily whispered, "You used him to hurt me." Sophie's smirk widened. "Or maybe he chose me because you were too blind to see him." Mark's voice was firm. "This isn't love, Sophie. It's cruelty dressed up pretty." The room turned icy, every memory of laughter replaced by this bitter revelation. Emily replayed years of Sophie's words, realizing they were weapons disguised as warmth. Daniel reached for Emily, but his hand shook with guilt. Emily stepped back, trembling. The betrayal wasn't just real. It was intentional, and it rewrote every piece of their history. Emily tried to steady herself, but Sophie's words sliced deeper with every breath. "He wanted me, Emily, not you," Sophie declared, her tone dripping with triumph. Emily cried, "You stole what I trusted most." Sophie's eyes gleamed. "I didn't steal. He gave." Daniel shook his head, voice breaking. "It's not what you think." Emily shouted, "Then tell me what it is." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Mark's jaw clenched, whispering, "Sometimes silence is the cruelest confession." Emily's chest burned, each heartbeat a crack in her soul. Sophie leaned forward, smile cruel, knowing she'd won something that should never have been a game. Emily realized then that betrayal didn't just happen. It was crafted, sculpted, and Sophie had been the artist all along. Emily's world collapsed as Sophie whispered the final cut. "He told me he never loved you the way you thought." Daniel's face twisted in pain, unable to deny or defend. Emily's voice cracked, "You're lying." Sophie's grin widened. "Am I?" Mark stepped forward, voice steady. "Enough, Sophie. Some wounds don't heal when you salt them." But Sophie only shrugged, her cruelty glowing in the storm of Emily's devastation. Emily felt her chest hollow, the air gone, the world muted except for the sound of her heart breaking. Years of promises dissolved into ash. The twist wasn't just betrayal. It was Sophie's satisfaction in watching Emily unravel. And Emily knew she would never look at friendship, love, or loyalty the same again. Emily's voice cracked into a scream. "You were my sister, Sophie." Her hands shook, fingers curled into fists as if holding her pain in place. Sophie laughed coldly. "Sisters? No, I was just waiting for you to fall." Daniel stepped forward, reaching, "Please stop this," but his voice was drowned beneath the storm of words. Emily's chest heaved, her sobs slicing the air sharper than any blade. Mark's calm voice trembled. "Enough. You're destroying everything." Sophie smirked, her tone soaked in venom. "Everything? Emily destroyed herself by trusting me." The weight of betrayal pressed into every corner of the room, silence colliding with shouts like thunder. Emily screamed louder. "You never cared, did you?" Sophie's silence was her cruelest answer. Emily's words exploded like lightning. "I gave you everything, Sophie, and you spat it back as poison." Sophie stepped forward, eyes blazing. "I took what I deserved." Daniel's voice cracked. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way." Emily turned, her tears mingling with rage. "You don't get to explain while my heart is bleeding." Sophie snarled, "Then bleed." The room shook with the violence of their voices, thunder echoing outside as if nature itself mirrored the storm inside. Mark finally raised his voice louder than before. "This isn't victory, Sophie. It's ashes." Emily's chest burned, every breath a war between grief and fury. She saw Sophie's face and knew she was staring into a stranger she once called family. Emily's fury erupted. "You envied me all along." Sophie's laugh was jagged. "Envied you? I pitied you, Emily." Daniel closed his eyes, whispering, "Stop." But the fire in Sophie's voice only grew. Emily's tears blurred her vision, yet her words were sharp. "You used every secret I gave you to gut me alive." Sophie smirked. "Secrets are power, and you handed me all of yours." Mark's voice dropped. heavy and unshakable. Power gained this way leaves only ruins. Emily's sob turned into a roar, her hands trembling as she pointed at Sophie. You were never my friend. Sophie's silence gleamed like victory, a dagger twisted deeper by the quiet. The walls of the room seemed to close in, suffocating under the weight of words that could never be unsaid. Emily shouted, You ruined me for no reason but spite. Sophie's grin curved sharper. Spite? No, Emily, I wanted to prove I could take everything from you. Daniel's voice cracked with anguish. This isn't what I wanted. Emily spun toward him, eyes blazing. Then why stand with her? His silence screamed louder than thunder. Mark stepped forward, his tone sharp as steel. You both destroyed something sacred. Sophie shrugged, cruel delight in her eyes. Sacred is just fragile waiting to break. Emily's sobs grew ragged, her voice echoing like shattered glass. You killed every version of us that ever existed. Sophie's reply was silence, and that silence burned worse than words. Emily's voice dropped to a whisper sharper than any scream. I hope this victory tastes like ash in your mouth. Sophie tilted her head, mocking smile never fading. Victory always tastes sweet to the one holding the knife. Daniel wept silently, his tears staining the silence, his body collapsing inward with shame. Emily turned to him, voice breaking. You were part of this too. His answer was silence, heavier than stone. Mark's final words echoed like thunder. Sometimes betrayal doesn't end in war, it ends in graves. The storm outside howled, rattling the house, but the real storm had already finished its destruction inside. Emily collapsed into the weight of her own grief, while Sophie stood tall, wearing cruelty as her crown. The climax had come, and the friendship was nothing but wreckage. The storm ended, but silence pressed heavier than thunder ever had. Emily walked out into the rain-soaked street, her steps dragging like broken glass across pavement. Sophie remained behind, her smirk fading into cold emptiness. Daniel whispered after her, Emily, wait, but his voice was swallowed by the night. Emily didn't turn back. She couldn't, not when her heart was in pieces scattered behind her. Mark caught up slowly, umbrella in hand, his voice steady. Some endings are the only way forward. Emily's tears mixed with the rain, her face pale beneath streetlights. Every memory clung to her, but none could warm the hollow space. Sophie left. Friendship was dead, and Emily walked carrying the corpse of what they once were. She whispered to herself, I'll never be the same. Emily sat on her bed, the weight of betrayal pressing like a stone on her chest. She touched old photos of her and Sophie, laughter frozen in time like ghosts mocking her grief. Daniel's texts buzzed on her phone, unread, unwelcomed. She whispered, You don't get to comfort me when you stood with her. Mark sat in the corner, quiet as always, but his presence felt like an anchor. He said softly, Pain doesn't vanish, but it teaches. Emily pressed her forehead against her knees, tears soaking fabric, her body trembling with the effort of simply existing. The room smelled of rain still clinging from her soaked clothes. She whispered again, Forever doesn't exist, and the truth stung worse than Sophie's lies. Emily forced herself outside days later, walking through the park where she and Sophie once carved their names into a tree. The initials mocked her now, carved too deep to fade. She pressed her hand against the bark, whispering, You broke this too. Daniel approached from a distance, guilt written across every step, but Emily raised a hand, stopping him cold. Don't, she said, her voice a whisper sharp enough to cut. He froze, tears gathering but didn't speak. Mark leaned against a bench nearby, his eyes steady, watching as Emily stood tall in the ruins of her heart. The wind rustled leaves above, carrying whispers of laughter long gone. Emily turned away from Daniel, choosing silence over shattered excuses. Emily walked into the cafe where laughter once bound them, the same corner table now empty like a shrine to something lost. Sophie sat there alone, sipping coffee with her usual calm arrogance. Emily froze, then walked past without a word. Sophie glanced up, smirked faintly, but Emily didn't look back. Her silence screamed louder than fury ever could. Daniel sat by the counter, his eyes following Emily, pleading without voice, but Emily ignored him too. Mark walked behind her, nodding in quiet approval, his voice soft. Walking away is sometimes the loudest choice. Emily felt her chest ache, but also something new, a strength born from loss. She realized she wasn't just walking past Sophie. She was walking toward herself. Emily stood on a bridge at dusk, city lights flickering to life beneath her. She whispered into the wind, "I may be broken, but I'm still here." Sophie's betrayal burned inside her, but it no longer defined her. Daniel's guilt was his burden to carry, not hers. Mark joined her silently, no words spoken, just the quiet company of someone who understood. Emily felt the sting of loss, but also the fire of resilience. She thought of who she was before Sophie, and who she might become after. She whispered again, "I'll heal not for them but for me." The wind carried her words across the water, scattering them like fragments of a new beginning. Forever was gone, but tomorrow still waited. Emily sat in her quiet apartment, the echo of Sophie's laughter replaced with a hollow stillness. She whispered, "I don't even know who you were." The photo albums on the table mocked her with frozen smiles. Daniel's name blinked on her phone, unanswered again. She thought, love and loyalty had both betrayed her, each wrapped in Sophie's cruel smile. Mark entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea, setting one before her without a word. Emily said softly, "I don't think I'll ever laugh the same way again." Mark replied, "You will, but it will sound different." Emily stared out the rain-streaked window, grief and strength mixing like oil and water. Forever had died, but she still had a pulse, and that meant she had to live. Emily wandered through the streets at night, neon signs glowing, people passing without knowing the storm inside her. She thought of Sophie's betrayal like a scar carved into her skin. She whispered, "I'll carry it, but I won't let it own me." Daniel watched from across the street, unable to approach, his guilt rooting him in place. Sophie's shadow lingered in Emily's mind, her words echoing like poison. Mark walked beside Emily, his silence steady, grounding her as the world moved on. She realized survival wasn't healing, it was choosing to walk even when her heart dragged behind. The city lights flickered like broken stars, but she kept walking forward, step by heavy step. Emily stood in front of Sophie for the last time, their eyes meeting like strangers bound by a war only they understood. Sophie smirked faintly, her voice calm, "You'll thank me one day for showing you who I really am." Emily's lips trembled, but her voice was steady. "No, Sophie. I'll curse myself forever for not seeing it sooner." Daniel hovered nearby, torn between guilt and silence. Mark's gaze was sharp, cutting through Sophie's facade. Emily's hands shook, but she didn't cry. She realized tears were too precious to waste anymore. Sophie turned away with the same arrogance she always carried, but this time Emily didn't break. She stood strong even in her scars, watching the chapter close with finality. Emily returned to the rooftop where she and Sophie once promised forever. The stars felt colder now, like distant witnesses. She whispered, "Forever was always a lie." Daniel was absent, his silence a wound she refused to reopen. Sophie was gone too, her shadow lingering only in memory. Mark sat with her, their silence comfortable, not haunting. He finally said, "Some bonds break to teach us what we deserve." Emily nodded, her tears falling but her voice steady. "I deserve better than betrayal dressed as love." The rooftop wind cut sharp against her cheeks, but she didn't shiver. She was no longer the girl who trusted blindly. She was someone else now, scarred but unbroken. Emily walked away from it all, the final words carved into her like scripture. She whispered to herself, "They didn't just betray me. They betrayed every version of us we could have been." Her voice was quiet, but it echoed louder than any scream. Sophie's laughter haunted the edges of her memory. Daniel's silence weighed like stone, but Emily carried her own truth now. Mark walked behind her, step steady, like a witness to the end of something sacred. The night air was sharp, the city alive, but Emily was walking into her own beginning. Her heart was broken, but it still beat, and that was enough to keep moving. The scar would remain, but scars are proof of survival.